I don't even know if we've really gone through this.
We haven't, but that's okay. I like chapter 10. It's only like, what, 4 verses long? 3. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are podcasting, finally, again. And Pastor Randall is not with us, but his glasses are. And so we're going to see. That does not help me one bit. It helps me right here.
Yeah.
But we are sans Randall, as you can see if you're watching. If not, you're listening, then just know you're not going to hear Randall's voice right now. We're in the book of Esther, and we're getting into some interesting scriptures because we're coming off of more of the history portion, and now we're getting into some of the other things that we learned from God, of course, through some of the other circumstances and stories that are just around. So Esther, during the time of the time period that we were just in, Nehemiah and stuff, but then we're going to go back to Job, which when we get to Job, we'll kind of maybe talk a little bit about the timing of that, when it may have actually happened. But Book of Esther, interesting because it doesn't mention God's name specifically.
Right.
We just see his handiwork. Yeah. And we see allusions to him, talked about him.
It's in a scroll or, in a set of scrolls where they would read these at festivals, and Purim is the festival that they would read Esther at because it is the foundation of that festival. The Israelites have celebrated, many festivals, but they're all written about in the Pentateuch. And so Esther and the Festival of Purim, they have to kind of have the reasoning of like, hey, why are we doing this? And so Esther made it into Jewish canon because of that. Yeah, again, it's unique because it doesn't mention God at all, but you do see God's sovereignty over every detail.
Well, I think what's interesting to me within all of this is because God's name is not mentioned, then I sometimes wonder if that's part of the point. Because obviously when we're not seeing God mentioned specifically and we don't see words from God, direct revelations from God, then you see God's providence. And so I was writing down some of the different things. And so towards the beginning, I'm like, all throughout this, you can see it. And these are not necessarily in chronological order as they show up in the book of Esther, but Mordecai in his position, his character, Esther in her position, the fact that she found favor in everyone's sight. It was like no matter what happened, it seemed like she found favor. Mordecai warning the king a long time, the fact that the king couldn't sleep. And so he brought in let's read what happened and stuff. And then it finds out that reminded of Mordecai and how he helped him and helped save his life. And so how that happens, Haman scheming and how he ends up being hanged on his own gallows that he built. I mean, there's so many different things, little things that add up to God protecting, God just his providence, I guess, ultimately, and his sovereignty over all of it.
Another thing that I think about that is interesting is the different versions of or Esther that's in different Bibles. Like the Greek has a different one, and then there's a more atypical one. I don't even remember the name of it, but basically those versions add in stories to bring more of an explanation of, what God is doing in the background of all these things to kind of like reconcile the text. And I like what you had said earlier about like, maybe the point is that God doesn't have to be mentioned in this because you're seeing his work more than his praise. But, God's praise is a direct result of his work. Yeah. And so, you see that whether or not it's explicitly written or not.
Yeah. As we move through the story, we're introduced to King Xerxes, essentially, and things, as stories go, I guess, we find out there's this conflict. And the conflict is, even though things are great, he's celebrating. I mean, this is 6 months that he's, in chapter 1, he's like, listen, let me show the riches of my glory and the splendor. And so even that, you're like, okay, there's this king. He's got all these riches and all this glory, and he's wanting to party down, let everybody see, and he tells his kingdom to do the same. And then towards the end of it, there's like this special time, and so he's calling and he's saying, okay, well, let me bring out more of my possessions, if you will, or what have you. And so he's calling for Queen Vashti, and she refuses, and that's a big deal because now, as we see this, and as he's going to these people that are kind of his advisors, then he's like, what should we do? Essentially they're like, well, if you're in a pickle because if you don't do anything, then now all the different women throughout the reign are going to be like, oh, well, we don't have to listen to our husbands and whatever.
Yeah, right.
But on the other hand, he probably cares about her, and, he might not want to kill her. So he puts her away, takes the crown away, and then there's a beauty contest.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting time.
yeah. And as anybody that's reading this, we understand that there is more than just a beauty contest going on. That's kind of what we're reading between the lines as far as how words are described and the words that are used. And as Pastor Randall mentioned when he preached on it, as we're reading scripture, sometimes we understand these are people that don't believe in God doing things that people would do when they don't believe in God and they don't abide by his law.
Right.
And when you think about that, you're like, well, it only makes sense that they're doing it the way that they're doing it. Like that just follows suit.
Yep.
And so Esther, one of the things again that we mentioned, she's gaining favor in everybody's sight. She kind of gets the favor of the people that are in position, and she gets special attention to an extent. And again, we can't isolate this from the fact that God is doing this. And so in Mordecai, when we get to chapter 4, and Mordecai is like, hey, maybe God is doing this for a reason. Maybe you've been put in this position for a reason. Then it just, I think all these things are leading and makes her think, well, yeah, probably so.
Yeah. I like, you see her kind of just walk up through the ranks. Like, she gains favor with the eunuchs, and the eunuchs are the ones that are kind of like, well, you know what a eunuch is. Yeah. But they're the people that are like the king's servants, and so they're taking care of these women in their transition time. And so she's gaining favor with them, and then when it comes her time to be with the king, and so like, all these people that she's been around have loved her. And it makes me think like, okay, so maybe the king has had kind of an inkling of what's coming when Esther comes. And so, basically as the scripture reads, it's just Esther went and the king loved her more than anybody else. And so like, you're just like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. She just kind of walks in and she's already loved. Yeah. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me too that there's several moments of irony within this story. And I think that shouldn't be lost on us either. So the irony of Vashti, the king wanted to show off her beauty and show off, who she was and stuff. So put the royal headdress and, stand before us, whatever. And she didn't do that. And so he's like, okay, well, the answer to that is to find the most beautiful woman in the land and make her queen. Be like, okay, well, we're gonna one up this. So there's a little bit of irony there. There's the irony of how Haman and Mordecai basically switched places. And so everything that is supposed to happen with Mordecai happens to Haman, and everything that Haman was hoping for happens to Mordecai. Even as we go further, and he's like, the king is asking Haman, oh, what should I do for the one who the king wants to honor? And he's like, oh, go all out, man.
Yeah. Because he thought he was talking about himself. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we can find ourselves doing sometimes if our pride gets the best of us, then we're like, yeah, lay it on thick, as thick as you can. And he's like, okay, well, go do this to Mordecai. And of course, Haman, as this is fast forwarding, of course, but Haman is already pretty ticked off at Mordecai, already hates his guts, and has the gallows built, because of that and everything. And yet he's being honored. And that even the timing of it is interesting to me. So I'm not sure how long has passed between as we're going through and Haman starts plotting against the Jews. He hates Mordecai, he hates the people. And so he's trying to get Xerxes to say, hey, will you support this plan that I have? And he does. He rubber stamps it, and golden signet
It's kind of
ring.
interesting to me, though, because it kind of, I don't know, I get the impression that Xerxes is kind of hands off. He's like, you just do whatever you need to do. I'm king. I'll, here's my signet ring. You can use it and sign whatever you need. But I get the impression that he's not really understanding what's going on. And I don't know if you get that, but that's what I get. I just get that, Haman comes in, pleads his case, like, hey, I want to do this, but...
Well, certainly he's trusting people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and, Haman wouldn't be in the position that he's in if he didn't trust him. So, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to is he's in a position where he has people.
Yeah.
And so he's trusting his people to do what they're supposed to. And that's part of the reason probably why when Mordecai says, hey, there's these eunuchs that are planning on killing you, because they're upset with you, then it's a big deal. He knows that he can trust them. And Haman, he thought that he could trust him for a long time and didn't really put the pieces together until later on, for sure.
Well, there's something that's repeated a lot in here, and it's that Esther hasn't revealed her heritage to the king. And so he doesn't even know that she's not Persian. Or at least, she doesn't tell him.
Yeah, Mordecai instructs her not to tell anyone, make it known. And I imagine that probably that was because it probably already started with when she was taken into the harem. Then he said, hey, keep it quiet. And we're not really given why all that may have been, because it doesn't seem like the Medes and the Persians at this time are against the Jews necessarily. But I'm sure it probably also would have played into it if he did find out that she was a Jew. Maybe she wouldn't have gained as much favor, perhaps. It's hard to say. Within all this story, and again, Pastor Randall, if you guys haven't listened or you weren't present when he preached on it, he gives a good rundown of the story. And so go back and watch that sermon. But as we move through the story and everything, then just understand, again, God's sovereignty. And this is really where I want to at least introduce, and we see more of it in Job. And so we'll probably talk a little bit more about it in Job. But at this point, Esther is kind of dealing with, okay, well, how much does man's responsibility and the actions of man, obviously we're seeing this all plays into what God wants to happen, right? So Esther is raised to a position, Mordecai is raised to a position where they are honored and they're saving the Jews in this particular case in order to come back, to have that remnant and everything. Could it have been another time where this was not all the Jews, and so there was other Jews and they could have still been the line of Judah that would have been preserved and Christ coming and everything? I guess it comes down to what I'm trying to say is, how does God's sovereignty play in and his providence play in with man's actions? How much do you think it has a carryover or crossover or whatever?
Okay.
Like we go throughout, let me put it this way. We go throughout our day and we're making decisions.
Right.
And there are certain decisions that we make that God may very well be using to put us in a position or put us in a scenario, a situation with people or what have you. Maybe it's just building character, but we don't know. And so we can look back in our lives. I think each of us can look back in our lives and say, man, God used that and that and that and that to bring me to this point. And if it weren't for those things, then where would I be now? And so when we think about that and we look at the book of Esther, maybe that's where my mind goes.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm tracking with you, especially. So I think it comes down to the integrity. I think if we look at the character of Mordecai, and, he obviously honors his Lord, but also he respects the king. And, so when you see at the end of chapter 2, this little interjection of, hey, Mordecai, I've heard that these eunuchs are planning something against you. And so, he doesn't know what is going to come of that other than like, hey, I'm going to save the king's life. Because, he's just standing up for what he believes is right. And so, he knows that anybody conspiring against their government should not, in this case, rightfully get away with it. Later on, though, he realizes that, this is the very thing that puts him in a position to be able to write into law, basically that the Jews can defend themselves against the law that Haman had wrote. So because of that one little tiny thing, that allowed Mordecai to be in a position to help. And also Esther being basically his adopted daughter in this case also helped. And so like these little tiny things that you don't think about are God is using. And so that's kind of what I would say in response to your question is that, you don't know, but God is using every decision, and we won't make good decisions. And sometimes God still uses those. Yeah. Which is merciful.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point we know, and because we can see this all throughout the rest of the Old Testament, especially that we've seen, God will use different people. And sometimes he even says, he clarifies it for us. I raise this person up for this reason, right? Whether it's good or bad in our eyes. And so this is where I'm trying to, I guess, deal with in my own life. And God is, we've got, like you said, we've got to be faithful. We've got to be living with as much integrity and character and holy towards holiness as much as we can. But we also know that God is doing what he needs to do. And so yes, when we're struggling with, okay, well, I have a choice to either do what I think is best or what God thinks is best, then obviously we bring God more honor and glory when we do the right thing. Right. But it also does help us to know that if we screw up, so to speak, if we go to the wrong place, if we take the wrong job or I don't know, whatever it might be, God is still in control. He's still sovereign. He's still able to bring people along, and he knows exactly what's going on. Yeah. And so, even even if we backed up and we said, okay, well, the reason why these people are in the position where they are and needing to be saved in the first place is because of their rebellion.
Right.
Now, maybe not their rebellion, but the rebellion of their people.
Yep.
Right. And so God is working his covenant love, but it also means he's working in the details because of man's responsibility in terms of the sin and stuff. And again, with Job, we'll get into something kind of on the other side with, when the suffering happens. But yeah, I think all of this is just super interesting to me because there are so many different things. And even like you mentioned, Purim, I mean, the casting with lots, like obviously we've already seen the Uman and Thummim, where it's like they would literally cast down things that are random in our eyes,
right?
But believing that God is in control of those random in order to seek the will of God.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another question, whether we should use that again. I think one Sunday you should cast lots for the songs that we sing.
Is casting lots, somewhat similar to, hey, what is my word today, God?
Yeah. Flip
2 days
it and
before the
point
Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the chief priests and the experts in the law were trying to find a way to arrest Jesus.
Yeah, and if you can't
wow,
figure out
this
how
speaks
that,
to me today.
Yeah, and if you can't figure it out, then you just got to spend more time in it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. We see so much happening within all of this, and I think that yes, this is not something that we go to. I think 4:14 with we quote 4:14. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, and I think that's great because Mordecai, in his faith, he's showing that God can do what he's going to do, and he's going to be faithful. Like he's solid on what God and who God is, and so even in the confusion perhaps as to what to do, and Esther is faced with this choice: do I do it? Do I not? I could potentially die if I do this. And Mordecai is challenging her with, maybe God has put you in this position. Then I think it shows great faith in the covenant love of God, similar to Abraham. God will provide a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. But yet the struggle and the turmoil of the individual say, should I do the right thing? Is this even the right thing?
Yeah.
Is it the right choice?
So, I mean, if we think about basically where the story was headed, if God didn't raise up Esther or Mordecai, saying that Haman was still in charge, then Haman would have gone through with writing this law and Mordecai would have died on the gallows and nobody would have been there to save the Jews. And so they would have all perished because this law went out through the entire land. Mm-hmm. And so basically if you were around Persia, under Persian rule, then the citizens of Persia had the right to just kill any Jew.
Yeah.
And plunder their stuff.
Yep. Give them some motivation.
Basically, God working in these small details saved his entire people. And even more than that, like we look to this as God saving his people here, but when God sends his only son to save his entire people, it wasn't just from physical death, it was from the spiritual death. And I love the foreshadowing of God raising up someone who was so low in this to be able to save their entire people, and Jesus being so humble, willing to set aside his godliness so that he could become just like one of us and be able to be that ultimate sacrifice. It's beautiful to see how this story does really fit into the narrative of Scripture, even though it seems kind of like, okay, well, it doesn't mention God at all. Yeah. And we get this one celebration from it. Yeah. So that
we don't celebrate.
Right. We don't even celebrate
as Christian, as Gentile believers.
Yeah. Yeah. But we do celebrate God saving an entire people group, and that is his children. I don't even know if we've really gone through this.
We haven't, but that's okay. I like chapter 10. It's only like 4 verses long. 3. It's gotta
Esther
be. Is it the shortest chapter of the Bible? I'm sure.
Esther is known for the longest verse. I think it's 8:9. Esther 8:9, which doesn't really say a whole lot. It's like the king's scribes were quickly summoned in the 3rd month. That is the month of Sivan. On the 23rd day, they wrote out everything that Mordecai instructed to the Jews, and but whoever was writing down, here's how we're going to break this up. They made a long one. That's just some trivia that I learned in going to a Christian school.
There you go. I wouldn't have been able to pull it out. All I know is Jesus wept.
Yeah, shortest verse, Jesus wept. Longest verse, Esther 8:9.
There you go. Yeah. So that's, I mean, hopefully with this and with Pastor Randall going through it, then we've done justice to the book of Esther. We will continue to pick up in Job, because I think, Esther is part of it. It brings up some of it. Well, what happens when, we're just trying to do good, and how that plays into the big picture. And obviously our lives, chance-wise, statistically, is not going to be as big, directly significant as Esther's was. But at the same time, we still understand our place and what does it mean if I decide to purchase this or not? What does it mean to talk to this person or be silent? Should I get up at this time, go to bed at this time? All the little decisions that we have and interactions with people that we have, and how that plays into the bigger picture of the kingdom and eternal value. And I think Job is going to bring that even more, because again, we think, man, what is our life? So,
well, and I'll add too, in Esther, it's the Jews living in a land where they are the foreigners. And so, they're the minority as far as religion. Mm-hmm. And in Job, you get to see that, he is also a minority as far as his integrity towards the Lord. So, the parallel of, going from Esther into Job is, we just got a lot more to talk about.
Yep. And we do want Pastor Randall to be in on that one as well. So hopefully with Job, we'll talk more about and kind of beat the dead horse, if we haven't already by then, as far as suffering and how do we experience it, how do we deal with it, how, where does God's hand play into suffering, really, I think is what it boils down to, and some of what we see in Job. So that's Esther. We'll pick up in Job, and we'll see you guys next time.